Howdy, y'all. Pastor Josh Canepa here with our midweek devotion. We will be in Acts chapter 17. So if you want to look that up, pull that up on your phone, we're going to look at Paul in Athens. So Acts 17, pick it up with verse 16. Now, while Paul was waiting for them at Athens, his spirit was provoked within him as he saw that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers also conversed with him, and some said, "What does this babbler wish to say?" And others said, "He seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities, because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection." And they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? For you bring some strange things to our ears. We wish to know, therefore, what these things mean." Now all the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there would spend their time in nothing except telling or hearing something new. So Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God, in the hope that they might feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each of us, for in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring. Being then God's offspring, we ought not to think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of man. The times of ignorance God overlooked, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. And of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. Now when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, but others said, "We will hear you again on this." So Paul went out from their midst, but some men joined him and believed. And this is God's word. So I want to talk about culture, and for Christians, a lot of times there's kind of two places where we talk about culture, right? We talk about it in terms of movies, TV, internet, radio, that area, the media area or something like that. Or we talk about it when it comes time for elections, and we talk about the cultural issues, right? And so the question comes for us, how do we deal with and engage the culture in which we live? And make no mistake, there is a culture that exists, and culture exists in any, conglomeration of human beings, and whenever they organize themselves, there is a culture that exists. So let me take one step back from that and say, when we talk about culture, what are we saying? And so definition of culture, I'm going to give you a couple here. Number one, culture is the shared beliefs, behaviors, and artifacts of a particular group of people who share a common language. And a little more succinctly, this is from cultural critic Ken Myers. Here's what he says. Culture is what we make of the world. And so culture is there whether we like it or not. And so, and we hear this sometimes in Christian circles of just, anything that the culture is doing, we don't have anything to do with that. We don't want to submit ourselves to that. We can just do our own thing and we'll be fine. And so one kind of footnote on that, you are talking about creating a culture, right? You're talking about creating your own culture. So that notwithstanding, we live in a certain time and in a certain place, and being Christians, we believe that God has placed us here, right? Like, we are here for such a time as this. This is where we are. This is where we're supposed to be. and the culture is there. And the question is not if we will engage the culture. The question is, how will we engage the culture? And I would submit to you that there's kind of three options with that. We can reject, we can redeem, and we can receive. And so let's walk through those. Let's go through the first one. Let's start with receive, okay? We receive something. So we acknowledge and note that something in the culture is good and beneficial and for us and for other people, and so we receive that, okay? So in our culture, it is both a law and a cultural norm that when you come to a stop sign, you stop. We receive that. Because if we don't receive that, then we're going to drive through stop signs and we're all going to kill each other. That is not a good outcome. So there are certain aspects of the culture that we receive. Okay, there are as well aspects of the culture that we redeem. That is, there is something that is either neutral or something that could be fixed, and so we take it and we use it for good and not for evil. So, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but for example, the movie industry exists, the television industry exists, the publishing industry exists, and there are people out there who put out some really bad stuff, right? That doesn't give glory to God, that doesn't acknowledge Him, and that actively speaks against Him. Okay? That's true. However, would it be possible for us to do things like make television shows and make movies and write books that instead of speaking against God, they embrace God? And instead of telling falsehoods about God, they tell the truth about God and Jesus. What if we used those mechanisms that exist in our culture and we use them for good and not for evil? So we're taking something that's either neutral or bad, and we redeem it, right? We take it, we change it, and we put it forward as something that acknowledges God's love for us, Jesus' redemptive work for us on the cross, and we use it and we megaphone it to get it out there so that people can hear the good news of God's love and Jesus' work. That's where we redeem something. And then, there are other things that we reject, right? So there is, you could say there exists in our culture, and hopefully a very deep subset of our culture, people who think that, for example, murder is okay. We can't receive that, certainly, because it's in the top 10, right? You can't do that. And we can't even redeem that, right? There is no structure and no place where I could talk to you about, hey, in this case, murder's all right. We're not there. And so we have those three things, right? Receive, redeem, reject. And so when we deal with any kind of cultural aspect, issue, item, we go through our brain and we go through the three and we say, well, which category does this fit into? And I think in a lot of ways, our culture, there's a lot that can be redeemed from it. And so it is the job of Christians to work on that. And we've kind of taken two different approaches to this over the course of history. And one is that we would, back off from culture, cloister ourselves. We would, go off by ourselves and say, you know what, that thing is so bad, it's so off, it's so lost, we can't even get involved in it. And so we're just going to come over here, we're going to do our own thing, we're going to build our own structures and stay away from everything in the culture and just buy a lot of ammunition and canned goods, right? And just do our own thing. And so the other extreme way we can do it on the other side is say, well, the culture's here and there's nothing we can do about it, so I'm just going to embrace it. I'm going to do everything the culture says to do, whether God thinks it's good or thinks it's bad or anything. I'm here. I got to do it. I like to sin. Jesus likes to forgive. We should get along great. Okay. The way forward, though, is a middle ground in that, right? and that is that we acknowledge that we're here and there are things that we can do within the world in which we live, in our community, in our culture, in our, with the people surrounding us, where we can proclaim the name and the love of Jesus in our culture in such a way that people can hear and know and receive his redemptive truth. And so, and part of, and I want to share with you, part of my formation of some of this culture, theology of culture, if you want to call it that, I attribute to a guy named Jay Budziszewski, who is a PhD professor at UT. And he wrote this book. How to Stay Christian in College. This is kind of the oldest version of it, and I don't even remember when I first was exposed to this. But he talks about, and I'll show you the updated version that you can buy on Amazon or a lot of other places. It looks like this. If you are a college student, if you have one of those in your household, you know what? We're coming up on the holidays. He or she is going to be home with a lot of time on their hands because they can't go out and hang out with their friends. Get this book and tell them to read it, because it's very helpful in dealing with some very practical aspects of the college experience, but also some of this philosophical and theological stuff that we're talking about here. And in doing that, he opens chapter 3 by talking about this scene in Athens that I read earlier, where Paul encounters these different kinds of people when he goes to Athens. And I'm going to share with you, and you can see my notes a little bit maybe that I wrote in reading this and in developing some thoughts on this. And I just want to share some of that with you. When Paul goes to Athens, he encounters 4 different groups of people, right? He encounters the Jews and the God-fearing Greeks. That's on the one hand. And he encounters then the people in the marketplace, the Epicureans, and the Stoics. Those last 2 groups are those philosophers. And you can draw a parallel between each of these groups and, on the one hand, people you encounter on a college campus, and also, I think for those of us who aren't doing that right now, just lots of different kind of people that we encounter on a day-to-day basis, right? So on the one hand, Jews and God-fearing Greeks, and I refer to these as potentials, right? These are unchurched Christians, non-practicing Christians. Maybe they had that framework early in life, but they've fallen away from it. Jews and God-fearing Greeks, right? These are people who, they know that exists. They know that those structures are there. They know a little bit about what it means to be a Christian. They're just not into it really right now. Okay, so that's the one group. Second group here. We'll tell you what. I'm gonna skip the second group and go to the third group, the Epicureans. All right. If you know anything about the Epicureans back in the day, I would describe them as the pleasure seekers, right? These are the people who are living in the moment. They are doing what feels good. They are that's their philosophy. And I would kind of categorize this as the average college student, right? They're there in many cases for the social experience of it all. They're very busy on the weekends because they're spending a lot of time partying and doing that kind of thing. They are not focused on the deep spiritual issues. And I said that in the context of college students, but we know people like this in our daily life as well, right? They're doing their thing, and maybe they've even grown up a little bit. They're a little more mature. It's not about partying for them, but they have their things that they do. They have their commitments to family and things like that. They have their hobbies, and they're not really thinking about the spiritual aspect of a lot of this, right? And so then the next group, the Stoics. You may have heard about the Stoic philosophers, and I would put on them, if I'm going to distill them down to one word, it's going to be that they're prideful. And in this context, these are the pagans. They're opposed to the gospel. They maybe are into other religions. They would probably put themselves in the category of either atheist or agnostic, which most people who say they're atheist are actually agnostic. If you really drill them down on it, it's not. They just don't. They'll admit that they just don't know. and they haven't thought about it deeply enough to even consider that. And then the final group is the people in the marketplace, who I refer to. These are the passersby, right? These are the people you see in class. If you're a college student, these are the people you eat lunch with in the dining hall, maybe. Once again, back to our everyday aspect, if you're not in college, maybe these are coworkers, people who you encounter on a daily or on a frequent basis, and they're just there, and you're friendly with them, but they're the passersby, right? You don't engage on deep spiritual talks or anything like that, but they're there, they're in your life, and you care about them. Maybe you don't know exactly how to care for them, and you don't know how to get into the theological realm with them, but they're there, and so they're the passersby, and so it is possible for us to have these different kinds of people in our different walks of life. How do we encounter them, and what should we do with all of that? Here's what Westminster professor William Edgar said when it comes to what do we do with engaging the culture and engaging the different people in our lives and how they're engaging the culture. What should we do about all of this? Here's what he said. It is never enough simply to decry the evils of the world and then to offer salvation, either as a way of warring against culture or as an escape from the world. In his Mars Hill speech, Paul reminds his listeners of the original purpose of history. God is the maker of the world and everything in it. He is to be worshipped as such. And you'll hear me mention this from time to time. History, right? His story, which Paul reminds us of there. And so, what do we do with the culture? Okay? So, it's not only about the redemption of culture, but it is about the making of culture as well. And so, Christians can create culture. And we can be involved in that. And yes, it's in the books that we write. That's probably the most common. You'll also, hear Christian preachers and stuff on radio and TV. These days, I think radio is a little bit better than TV. But we can do it in a number of different ways too, right? I mean, there's podcasts out there. There's all kinds of aspects for that. Here's something else that we need. We need Christians in Hollywood. We need Christians in these cultural places and the places that culture is built and developed in our sphere here. We need to have Christians there. And so we need to have Christians making movies and TV and those sorts of things. Some of those Christian movies are really bad. We have to be honest about that. But I would love to see more Christians in mainstream media and mainstream creation of some of these things. And let's get those Christian themes into different places, whether it's TV, movies, cartoon, all these different sorts of things. And when we do that, that's how you start. That's one way to start changing the hearts of people, is if you can get Christian themes and ideas into the consumption of people on a regular basis. And so we need to make culture good culture for an infinitely good creator. So instead of simply condemning, critiquing, consuming, and copying culture, the way forward is to create a good alternative. Otherwise, we're just back at square one. Okay, so instead of choosing between making and redeeming culture, let's do both, right? We can make good culture. We can redeem neutral or bad culture. We can address the different issues that exist. And in so doing, we can contribute to human flourishing in all kinds of cultural expression, right? Art and science and tech and everything. Think of the gospel change that can occur if we can both create culture and redeem culture. And so I would invite you to figure out how to be a part of both. And hopefully that's something we can continue to talk about going forward. And so I'll leave you with those thoughts. Look forward to seeing you on Sunday. I will say that, so we got Thanksgiving coming up next week. And then the following Wednesday, so the Wednesday after Thanksgiving, we start our midweek Advent services. So those are going to be on Wednesday at 6 o'clock as we prepare for Christmas. And that's what Advent is. Maybe that's what I'll do in next week's videos, is kind of talk about what Advent is and everything with that. So I would invite you, though, to be here on those Wednesday services starting at 6 o'clock. The first date, I'll look it up here on the calendar just so I can say it for you. But the first date for our first Advent service, sorry, I hate to do this while I'm on camera. Our first Advent service will be coming up on December 2, okay? So December 2, December 9, and December 16 at 6 o'clock here in the sanctuary. That will be Advent services to prepare our hearts for the coming of the Christ child. I know everybody's looking forward to Christmas this year, and I am too. And I'm looking forward to preparing for Christmas with you in those Advent situations. So follow me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram. Don't follow me in real life. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Go ahead and ring the bell so you get those notifications and you know when a new one comes up. I love you guys, and I will see you in the next one.